Welcome back to another episode of the Rack Room Podcast. Colin, great to see you again.
Likewise, mate. Great to be back.
Yeah, absolutely. Colin, I wanted to chat this week about something that I've been having a thought about, and it really started kind of rattling in my head last night when I was watching a program. It's a young guy on YouTube. He's got a very large following, and I enjoy watching him. He's not just a hunter, but he does a lot of stuff that's outdoorsy, and I started thinking, why is there such a lack of young guys out there who are not using these platforms to promote hunting more? And then it made me start thinking a little bit about yourself being, a young guy who's filming hunting, who's out there all the time. And for some reason, I just went down a bit of a rabbit hole last night, and I was up until about 2 o'clock in the morning thinking about this. And I started looking into it a little bit more, and I started getting a little bit interested in, what is the current kind of state of affairs in the world in terms of hunting, the hunting community, society itself. Where are we at? And I know this sounds quite a loaded topic, but I'd like to just kind of delve into it a little bit more with you, and where we're at in terms of society. So I did a bit of research last night, and I've got some stats I went through, and I'm going to give you a bit of a maths lesson. So, I looked at a lot of different things, and one of the things that really struck me is the world population is sitting at around 8 billion people across the world.
Wow.
And out of that, we're looking at 92% of which are meat eaters. And that kind of took me down another road completely. And I started looking at, how many people are farming versus how many people are buying meat off the shelves, and I went into depth about hunting as a whole, and how many people in the world are actually going out there and getting their own food and putting their own meat on the table. And it's staggering to find out that actually, out of the 92% of the world's population who are meat eaters, which equates to about 7.5 billion people, only 0.5% of the global population are actually hunters or have hunted at some stage in their life. I mean, to me, it's mind-boggling. I know that a lot of people out there have homesteads where they raise their own cattle, and you yourself are on a cattle farm, and they're bringing up their own pigs and chickens and what have you. But the reliance in the world on actually having to buy meat as opposed to us being able to go out and get our own meat is staggering to me. It works out to, if my calculations are correct, about 45 million people in the world are left who are hunters, and it's not a lot. It's not a lot.
That's crazy. That is, no, mate. It's very, very mind-boggling and eye-opening to actually hear the statistics, because, we always look at the amount of people, as you say, who are buying meat versus the amount of farmers that there are in the world. And as a cattle farmer myself, I mean, producing beef is our primary operation at the moment. And you look at all these people who are promoting veganism and provoking people to pull away from eating meat and red meat. The fact of the matter is that so many people are actually consuming meat in this world, yet so few people are farming it. And there are fewer and fewer people farming it as time progresses. I mean, farmers are being kicked off their land. And I mean, the situation in South Africa, as we all know, is it's detrimental to the production of food for our population. So, and I mean, when you look at hunting in the world, the number of hunters is coming down dramatically, especially in relation to our population. I mean, how many people do you know? I'm sure you can probably count it on two hands that are hunting and providing meat for their families through hunting themselves. I mean, it's very sad to think that people are putting farmers down for producing and slaughtering animals to feed the populations of the world, and putting hunters down when so many hunters are actually providing food for communities without income, who are providing food for their own families and providing food for their own circle of family and friends. So I do think it's sad. I think it's extremely sad that the numbers of people producing meat and the numbers of hunters that are actually going out and getting their own meat. I've done it myself. It's the most rewarding thing in the world. And for someone to experience it, you go out there, you go into the animal's habitat, you stalk that animal yourself, you harvest it, you process it yourself. And the feeling of being able to supply your family with food that you have harvested. You haven't paid much money to do it. Maybe you've paid $20 for a bullet. But at the end of the day, you're putting food on your own table in an ethical way. So yeah, I mean, it's super sad to hear those numbers. It really is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I look at it kind of, I've looked at it more in depth, and I looked at the numbers of, where are we at in terms of the age brackets in which people are hunting. Now,
Okay.
let's say we've got 45 million hunters across the world. Only 10% of that are people within the age of 18 to 30 years old. Can you believe it?
Wow.
Now this boggles my mind because that means that the rest of the hunting community are either very, very young, which I highly doubt, or pushing between 30 and 55 years old, or 31 and 55 years old, should I say. Now, this is I'm leading on to something here, but you can see that we've got a bit of an inherent problem. And I looked back, and 100 years ago. Now, 100 years might sound like a very long time, but my grandfather is still alive, and he's 99 years old this year. So
Yeah.
shout out to Granddad Ken, 99 years old, absolute legend. So 100 years ago it sounds a very long time ago, but
It's a lifetime.
my granddad's still alive. So, he experienced this, and 100 years ago,
Yeah.
10 to 12% of the global population were hunting. They were hunting. They
No way.
were going out. They were collecting their own meat. They were harvesting their own animals. They were doing their own butchery. And now we're down to 0.5% of the population. Now I understand that obviously, the global population is far bigger now than it was 100 years ago. But even by economies of scale, we're looking at a huge reduction in hunting and hunters around the world. And I think it's sad. I think it's very sad. I think that, there's a lot of factors which I want to discuss going forward about why this is. But it's worrying that such a low percentage of the population or should I say the last standing group of hunters in this world,
Yeah.
the smallest percentage of that are people within the age of 18 to 30 years old, when really that should be the biggest percentage out of everything.
Yeah.
And this is why I wanted to talk to you about it, because you still fall in the bracket of the 18 to 30-year-olds, and I'm a little bit outside of that now. Not too far outside, but I am outside of that. I wanted to hear your thoughts on why that is, and your peers when you were at school, what their thought process was on hunting. Because I remember back when I was in school, which was a number of years ago, it wasn't nearly as frowned upon as I think it is today if you tell somebody that you're a hunter.
No, for sure. I mean, mate, I couldn't count on two hands the amount of times that during school I would be called out for posing with an animal, or people know that I'm hunting, especially with content creation. People would find a YouTube channel and they'd come to me and they'd say, "Oh, how can you do this? How can you do this?" And they come from a point of judgment, not curiosity. I'm sure you've heard that saying before: you must be curious, don't be judgmental. What people have been influenced by nowadays is ironically the tool that we are trying to use to promote and to push the actual true values of hunting into the world, and that's social media. I mean, I'm sure you would have seen lots of hate comments in the past on hunting content by anti-hunters. And those are people sitting in a city somewhere who don't have any idea what hunting is about, what ethical hunting practices are about. And I look at back to the numbers. You threw a lot of numbers in the air. I'm going to try to do my best to throw some in here as well. At school, if we look in call it the senior division of the two main schools in the city where I was at high school, there were probably, call it 600 people between the two schools in the senior grades. And out of those 600, maybe 700 people, there were probably, I want to say, less than 10 people who hunted themselves in that senior division. And obviously all of us were very close mates because we had something mutual to bond over. But you look at how many people have grown up in a city where they eat meat, they eat biltong and droewors. but they aren't educated on the way that this is done. It's heartbreaking because people don't understand how much effort goes into conservation and how much effort goes into hunting ethically, because they've been brainwashed by the media propaganda from anti-hunters on social media, and they're led to believe that. I mean, 90% of people in my generation, if something pops up on their TikTok or their Instagram, they are so gullible because they've been trained to believe what they see on their phone. They aren't trained to believe, your word or my word. They're trained to believe what shows up in front of them because their phone becomes their life. That becomes their lifeline. And yeah, it's heartbreaking. It really is. You know, you look at how many people shun upon other people for hunting. It's terrible. They just aren't educated. And it's up
No,
to us to educate.
absolutely.
I
Yeah,
mean, you
and
look at
I think
our
you've
generation. Yeah, carry on.
sorry, I think you've hit the nail on the head when we talk about social media, and it's almost an indoctrination into society that hunting is bad, and all that's ever
Yeah,
shown is somebody sitting with a gun in front of, let's say, a lion or
yeah,
an
exactly.
elephant or a leopard or something along those lines, which I can understand why people would be upset by something like that.
Yes, yeah,
And I believe that there is definitely a place for trophy hunting. Don't get me wrong. I am not an
yeah.
anti-trophy hunter. I'm not personally a trophy hunter, but I'm not an anti-trophy hunter. And we could go on the trophy hunting, go down that rabbit hole as well, but I don't think there's enough time in the day. But the point is that when people are shown something on social media about hunting, it's often perceived in a way, or should I say represented in a way that is the worst form. and
Of
and
course,
it's and it's always and it's
100%.
always done it's always done in a striking fashion in order for people to look at it and go, that is bad, that is bad, hunting is
Yeah,
bad, hunting is evil, hunting is cruel. And this is where I think the perception, and perhaps we as hunters have a responsibility in order to do, is to start promoting more content and more things on social media that represent the true values of actual hunting. Things
true.
like, okay, we don't need to necessarily take a picture with everything that we shoot. I personally enjoy it. I like having the memory of it, but perhaps we balance that with something like, this is what I've shot, this is what I'm going to do with it, and this is how I'm going to
Yes,
process it, and this is how it's going to end up on my plate. And I
for
think
sure.
that we as hunters need to do that far more than we do. And I think in doing that, it should hopefully help to change the perception at least a little bit.
Yeah,
And it's a difficult scenario in today's world in order to try and get that over, as opposed to people just having this one perception of hunting. And it's funny because I had a guy over from the UK about a month ago, and he now works with us. He is inherently British and is very much active on social media, but not necessarily, doesn't necessarily share the same viewpoints as I share. So we were playing golf, and actually heard of Impala, walked across the golf course, and I said to him, look there, look there. In the UK, you just don't see those types of things. I said, check how beautiful they are. He says, oh yeah, no, those are stunning. And I said, yeah, we call them the McDonald's of the bushveld. And he looked at me in, very perturbed fashion. And I said, yeah, because if you have a look at their backside, there's a big X on their backside, and it looks like the McDonald's logo. So he just started laughing, and then I turned around and I said to him, they're bloody tasty as well.
yeah, you must have been dumbfounded.
And his face went from laughing to very serious very quickly. And I
Mm.
said to him, look, I'm aware, I've seen your social media, and I'm aware that you are not into hunting, but I just want to chat to you about it a little bit. And
Yeah,
his face was very kind of stern, and he looked at me and he said, look, I don't agree with hunting. There's not much that you're going to be able to say to me that's going to change my mind on this. And I said to him, what you need to understand is that not all hunting is as it is perceived online. Whatever
for
we
sure.
shoot, we eat. Me personally, whatever I shoot, I eat. And when I said that, his face started changing, and he started to soften up to the idea. And I said to him, I don't just go
Sure.
out and recklessly shoot things and then throw them in the bin. I said, and even those who come over to South Africa to come and hunt something that they haven't hunted before, they don't just chop the head off and then put it on the wall and everything goes to waste. Somewhere down the line, that meat either gets shared locally or it gets sold to the butchery and the butchery process it, then they sell it on. And so when I started educating him a little bit more, he really started understanding it better. And I think that's
Opening
one
up
of
to
the
the
big
idea a bit.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the biggest problems we've got in society these days is that people don't either do their research, or we as hunters are not doing enough to get that message across to non-hunters.
Yeah, and I mean, on that point, Andy, I almost feel a bit of pressure every now and then, and I shouldn't put it on myself, but the most influential generation at the moment is the social media generation. It's the generation that's grown up with it because all of us have access to it. Everyone has a phone in their hand, and the people creating the most content are in the age bracket of 18 to 30, as we said earlier. And that is the age group that's not hunting as much. So for the people who are in the age group and are hunting and putting it on social media, there's almost an unspoken pressure that's falling upon them to convey the right message to the people of their age group, to their peers. So for me, I almost feel it's a privilege to be able to do it. And, pressure is a privilege in a sense. The pressure to make sure that my peers are getting the right message on ethical hunting and why we do it. Because if I can reach people of my age, I'm going to make a better connection with them than someone who's 50 trying to educate them. Because we're on the same level. We're on the same period of our lives. And if I can connect to them in a way that they understand and tell them the truth about ethical hunting, to say, listen, okay, personally, I don't eat everything I shoot myself, but it is that meat gets to someone's mouth somewhere along the line, whether it's to the people that work on the farm, whether it's to a local community who is in need of food, whether it is to a butchery or whether it is to a soup kitchen. The meat within 3 or 4 days ends up on someone's plate in someone's mouth, regardless of who it is. So people need to understand that it's not a killing spree. We're not going out there and saying, there's a cool looking animal. Let me shoot it, take a photo with it, and then whatever happens, happens. It's not like that. It's very, very, very much the opposite of that. There's a lot more care. We have a lot more care for the animals than people think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You talk about, connection, and I think that's something that really society has lost is its connection. We're all connected on these, we're all connected on cell phones, but we're not connected to our surroundings. And
No.
it's something that really is missing. I grew up from a very young age, and it's strange that I kind of ended up in the way in which I did because none of my family are hunters. But when I was a young kid, I always had an air rifle in my hand or a fishing rod in my hand. It was one of the two, and I was always, out in the woods. And okay, not everybody has the opportunity to be able to do that. I fully understand. But now
Yeah.
I live in a city, and I don't have that opportunity to do that every day. But because something inherently in me, and I don't know if it's just me or if, I think inherently as humans we have a connection to nature, and we all strive at some stage in our lives to have a connection with nature. And
For
now I
sure.
have to go out and I have to go and get that connection. Whereas when I was a kid, I had the opportunity to be able to walk out my front door and the connection was right there. But
Exactly.
the
Yeah.
you know the connection when it comes to hunting goes all the way through, and it goes from understanding how to hunt is one thing, but then going all the way down the line to actually putting the food on your table. So you need to understand how
Yeah.
to skin the animal, how to gut the animal, how to prepare the animal, how to cook the animal, all of these types of things. And I think as a society, especially from the age brackets, and I'm not bashing the 18 to 30-year-olds at all. I'm not trying to do that. I'm just using them as an example because they are the smaller populace out of the existing hunting world. And it's
Yeah.
important that we try and bring that back, because if that generation doesn't grow up, or a portion of that generation doesn't grow up, understanding where their food is coming from, or at least having an experience to be able to go out and get their own food, then the next generation after them are certainly not. And that for me is
100%.
a problem.
Yeah, I mean, look, we
Now,
learn from our parents and our grandparents. So if this generation's learning nothing, what are their kids going to learn?
absolutely. No, you're spot on. Now, how do we now, perhaps we need to look at it from a different perspective. Perhaps, bringing in more of what that generation enjoy as part of hunting, perhaps as a solution. Where do we bring technology into hunting? Everyone kind of now is looking at technology, AI, all these things, and that's what's interesting that generation, or that age bracket, is certainly technology. Perhaps that we need to look at bridging the gap. How that's done, I'm not sure, but it's vital that we start getting that age bracket to get into hunting.
Yeah, no, that's true. But I mean, do we really want to be taking away the true experience? You bring in, I know when I go hunting, apart from the odd occasion that I take a camera, I'm trying to get away from technology as much as possible. And I think that is one of the big attractions, apart from, the pursuit and putting food on the table, is getting away from the world. Because we're living in a digital world. I heard someone the other day saying that we are the indoor generation. We make our houses and homes so comfortable that we don't actually have to leave them unless you've got a commitment to go to. I think, at least for me, hunting is a way to get away from the world, reset. I enjoy hunting by myself a lot because I can sit on a craan somewhere, on a cliff overlooking a valley, by myself quietly, and you know not to go too deep here, but you almost figure out who you are because you're away from the noise of the rest of the world. You go spend a weekend hunting by yourself. Promise you, you'll come back and you'll figure out exactly where you are in life. Because, we spend so much of our time being influenced by the opinions of others, and it's difficult to overcome. You get over it eventually if you try. But being solitary in nature, going back hundreds of years to the way it used to be. Okay, rifles have changed a little bit. Properties maybe have gotten fenced in and a bit smaller. But the pursuit of the animal hasn't changed since the first humans stepped foot on Earth. I think that's what's so special about it. So I think that there's definitely a place for technology to come in, but I think that we need to try educate people about hunting and also expose them to the fact that it's a nice way to get away from it all.
Couldn't agree with you more, but I think perhaps you, me, and the majority of hunters out there are wired slightly differently. And I'll tell you why I think that is because we've experienced that. Because once you've gone out there and you've sat by yourself and you've been in the wilderness by yourself, and
Yeah,
you're completely alone with nature. Only until such time as you've had that and you've done it a few times can you really truly appreciate that.
I
Now,
suppose so.
one of the problems that I've experienced, and I've been lucky enough to be with quite a few people when they've on their first ever hunts, and for me it's a privilege because I enjoy sharing all the first kind of I want to say rites of passage, if you will.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah. The
The
traditions.
first blood, yeah, exactly. The first blood on their
Yeah,
face, and that instant adrenaline rush where they're shaking so hard that their legs and
for
knees are
sure.
wobbling because it's the first thing they've ever shot. I've had the privilege of being able to do that with quite a few people. With that is the one thing I've noticed is the patience of people is a big problem, and I
That's
believe
true.
that is purely that a lot of that is down to technology and the speed in which we do everything these
100%.
days. Right, we've got
100%.
we've got a meeting now. Okay, let me just quickly pick up my phone. Dush, there's the meeting. We didn't have to drive to the meeting. We can do everything and anything we possibly
Mm.
want on our cell phones with our technology. And then you put someone in a situation where they're in the wild by themselves, sitting there.
Yeah,
There's no cell phone. It's quiet.
for
They get
sure.
bored really easily, really quickly. I mean, really quickly. I mean, like within an hour. And I've had it with people who don't fish as well, by the way. I don't know if you've ever been with people who don't fish and you take them
Yeah,
fishing.
lots of times.
Within an hour, they start throwing rocks into the lake or
Oh.
something just to keep themselves occupied.
Oh.
So, yeah, I mean, when I say technology, I don't necessarily mean, bringing a cell phone along with. I mean more, looking at how do we make things appealing for non-hunters outside of just telling them that we can go into the woods and we can shoot something and take it home.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, how do we expand that to a broader audience, and what does that look like? Perhaps the incorporation of, don't shoot me for this one, but maybe drones, for instance.
Possibly, yeah.
Drones are a big thing these days. A lot of people, I know at least 20 people who own drones. Bring them with. They can do a little bit of what you do, like the filming of the
Yeah,
hunt, just to introduce them to it and get them understanding and seeing it firsthand
for
before
sure.
even putting a rifle in their hand.
I think back to the point, I had something come up in mind that made me laugh in my head. The way that we work now is so different. Back in the day, people used to send letters to their girlfriends and wives, and now we can connect with them in a second instead of waiting a month for their letter to come back. That's the attention span separation in the generations. That is what is so important now, as you say. And
I mean,
jumping back to where we are, I think the incorporation of technology has to be used in a way where we can allow people to get a sniff of the experience. And where I'm going with that is hunting films. I mean, before I had ever been on a dangerous game hunt to film it myself, I had watched the compilations of the buffalo charges or the films of somebody's first hunt or, a film of how this hunter and this outfitter went and hunted these animals and supplied food to the communities who are, in at risk of starvation. And watching those films, it almost gives you just enough of the experience if it's done right. It gives you just enough of the experience to be more intrigued. So someone who's never hunted before and the hunting film pops up on their YouTube or wherever it is, and they get to understand a little bit of the backstory of hunting. They get to see the emotions of the hunter. They get to see the processing of the meat. They get to see the meat being sent out into the communities and how much happiness and support that meat brings the communities. I think that is one way that we can go around it. I do think drones might be a nice idea, though. I don't know what your plan is with that. What are you thinking?
yeah, I don't know is the honest answer. It was something that popped into my head, and perhaps I don't want to jump around too much, but drones, I believe there is a place for drones in hunting, and there's a couple of reasons for that. And the one is I have watched a lot of content recently on guys tracking wounded animals with drones. And
I've
it is
seen that.
incredible. It is incredible the success rate that they're having. Now, what they do is they use these thermal imaging drones. They're very expensive and they're super cool. And I really, really want one just to mess around with. But they go over and they've got an idea, where these, especially in these dense areas, very heavy forested areas in America, which is where most of the stuff that I've been watching is about it. But they go into these heavy, dense areas. They fly the drone over. They use the thermal imaging. Then they can switch between the thermal imaging and 4K imaging, and you can actually see the animal exactly where it is, and you can pinpoint its location. And I think
Man,
personally,
is
from
is that drone deer recovery? I think I've watched their videos before. Are we on the same page with that? Drone deer
I think
recovery.
I think
As
so.
a guy
Yes,
with a bit of a beard, man, I think they brought a drone to South Africa and did a similar thing.
possibly the same guys. Yeah, very
Possibly.
possibly the same guy. But my point is that can almost be incorporated in the ethics of hunting. Sometimes things go wrong when we go hunting. Sometimes you end up
True.
shooting, not a perfect shot, and the animal runs into the bush. I have personally had it where I have shot an animal, it's run into the bush, it's so dense, we've searched up and down for it, and we couldn't find it. I'm hoping that it
Yeah.
survived. I don't know. But if I had a thermal
Yeah.
imaging drone, I could have found it and found out.
Yeah. Flip.
Yeah, I think those types of things could potentially speak to a younger audience when we start talking about this is the new technology we're bringing into hunting, and it's
Mm.
almost like we've got to try and keep the tradition of hunting, but start making it look cool as well for the youth, so that
True.
it starts
Yeah.
piquing their interest. That's I think something that we're lacking. We're lacking as a
You've got to
society.
have, I suppose you've got to have a way to hook them. You scroll through social media on Reels and TikTok or whatever, and these media gurus are talking about the hooks on the videos. So they say you've got 2 seconds to grab someone's attention with a reel before they scroll. So these creators use a hook, so a sound or a zoom in effect. We almost need a hook to get the interest of the younger generation who has no exposure to hunting. And as you say,
Absolutely.
bringing technology in, that might be the hook that leads them to dive deeper, click onto the actual social media page after seeing that little video. We need to grab their attention with a hook and try to get them to do a little bit more digging and, get a bit of curiosity into hunting and the hunting culture and ethics and all of that sort of thing.
No, absolutely. It's interesting
Yeah.
stuff. We'll be right back. Welcome back. So, Colin, we've spoken about, the figures. We've done the maths.
Uh-huh.
These figures I've taken offline, so don't quote me on them. I'm hoping that they're correct. People feel free to comment below if my figures are incorrect. But we've spoken about the figures and the lack of youth that are getting involved in hunting. We've spoken about how do we transform that. But something that I think that what is often probably a daunting kind of aspect to hunting for young people is we don't know where to start. Now, access to land is often an issue that people have. Some people are very fortunate. They live in the countryside. They're able to go out whenever they feel like. But the majority of younger people, they live in the cities and they don't have access to these locations where they can go out and they can freely hunt. The other thing that I think is an inherent problem is not everyone has a rifle or a firearm. Most people have never even held a firearm in their life, and I think that's an issue. I think that people at some stage in their life should be able to use a firearm, and I think that access to those types of things needs to be increased. Obviously, very very safely done, but of course,
Yes,
but
yeah.
I would implore to anybody who hasn't had an opportunity to go out, shoot a rifle, try it out for themselves. It's that in itself is quite a thrill. I think you'll agree. It's always
Yeah, no, it
fun
is.
going out and testing guns and having a day at the
Yeah,
shooting
for
range.
sure.
And those types of things are accessible to pretty much everybody. If you go to a shooting
True.
range, you can rent out a gun, you can have an instructor, they'll show you how to use it, they'll show you how to
There
safely
we go.
use it. And
Yes.
I think that that's a good starting point for anybody who wants to try out hunting. Then
Yes, and I mean, sorry to cut into you. I think one point that's very important is that it's almost a necessity to know how to safely operate a firearm. The world is getting more and more dangerous as the population grows and especially in South Africa, as the unemployment rate shoots through the roof. I've got people that I know, friends of mine, who themselves and their wives, they do not leave the house without a firearm on them for personal protection. I was speaking to one of my very, very good friends recently, and she's actually planning on doing humanitarian aid in war zones and realized that she's not a clue where to start with a firearm. And, it's quite important in an area like that to know how to protect yourself if need be. I think, as you say, encourage anyone and everyone to at least have a basic understanding on firearm operation and safety for their own protection at bare minimum. I mean, it's nice to be able to hunt with, but if you can't protect yourself at the end of the day, it's a bit of an issue.
no, I agree. I think it is important. I think that everybody should at some stage in their life do some form of training to be able to use a firearm,
Yeah,
whether it's a handgun, whether it's a rifle, even if a semi-automatic, if you will. But
there we go. Yeah,
I think that it's very important, and I think it's a good starting point for everybody to firstly understand the tools that you're using before you're about to use them. Then, if we look at the availability of where how do we hunt? I know that in different parts of the world, let's take America for instance, there is state owned land which you can buy a permit to go and hunt on. There's certain sections throughout the country where you can visit, and even as a non-state citizen, you can buy a permit. You can go out there. You can do your thing. In the UK, extremely difficult to get a firearms license. Most of the time, you either need to be a landowner or you need to have landowner permission to be able to go and hunt on their land. So the UK is a different subject altogether. And to be honest with you, I think that their outtake on hunting and guns completely is yeah. I've got a lot of different opinions on the UK. I won't go down that wormhole, but
No wonder you
South
came to
Africa.
South Africa.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't. Let's say it wasn't conducive to the type of lifestyle I like to enjoy, or should I say, at least my hobbies. It rains most of the year, so that's
Yeah.
golf. That's golf out of the window. You need to basically either be in the army or have a very, very good friend who also hunts and owns land that you can go and shoot on to get a firearms license, or you need to join a club and go and shoot clay pigeons for that 90% of the year. So the UK is a different thing altogether. But let's take South Africa. So South Africa is
Yes.
is quite diverse in the sense that you can pretty much go and hunt in every corner of the country, so long
Yeah.
as you go through, someone who has a hunting farm or a ranch or
There we
whatever.
go. Yeah.
So the opportunity is certainly there for younger people, especially in this country, to be able to go out there and give hunting a go. I do think that the cost of hunting has become, enormously expensive for people who don't either live on a farm or have access to land,
Yeah.
you know for free. If I look at prices going back 10 years ago, we were looking at like 600 Rand for an Impala. And that was okay. You could live with that. You could go and have a good weekend and it wouldn't cost you too much. Now you want to go and shoot an Impala, it's 2,000, 1,800 Rand, let's say. Plus then you've got, if you don't have a rifle, you then got to hire the rifle, you've got to pay for rifle hire, plus then your fuel, all of your food, your accommodation, then your butchery fees and all these types of things. And I think that
It adds up quickly.
it adds up quickly and it becomes very expensive, and it's almost become another golf, for instance. Golf was
Yeah.
was was golf was inherently a rich man's sport, and if you didn't have money, you couldn't play golf. And then golf kind of came down a little bit, and it became more affordable for those who couldn't. You got cheaper clubs, you got golf courses that were a lot cheaper to access, and I think that hunting's kind of gone that way as well. It's become extremely expensive for people, and I think that's part and parcel of why we're seeing such a decline in that age bracket.
Yeah,
Just
true.
the cost alone is extraordinarily expensive, and it's a problem that we need to address. I've got a friend of mine who's coming with me now. When is it? May 15th of May. We're going up towards Louis Trichart's side on a hunt there, and it's his first time
Very
hunting.
nice.
And I sent him the price list, and he looked at it and he went, "Oh yeah, no, that's very reasonable. I mean, that's not bad at all." And I said to him, "Yeah, but that's actually the cheap part. Is the hunting part. That's the shooting of the animal is the cheapest part of the hunting." I said to him, "Then by the time you've put in all your butchery fees and he said to me, yeah, and I want loads and loads of Vors and loads of things like Pregos and I said to him, the
Mm.
cost of the butchery, by the time you're finished with all of the spices, all of the fat, all of the casings, all of the marinade, all of the vacuum packing, is probably going to end up being twice as expensive as the actual animal you shoot."
Exactly. He doesn't know what's the one who hit him.
He was clueless, and he couldn't believe it. And he said to me, "You got to be kidding me." And I said to him, "I'm not. That is the stark reality of it." And it's sad for me that it's become so extraordinarily expensive that it's now pushing people away from getting involved. And I think that that's something that
Yeah.
needs to be changed. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I've got a young PH who professional hunter who wants to come on the show and join us. He's got some clients over at the moment, so he's on the farm hunting with them. But I've got a young guy who wants to come and join us on the show in a couple of weeks' time, and it's certainly something that I'd like to discuss with him. Is when I say young, I mean he's 22 years old, and he's just starting his career in being a guide and professional hunter. And I'm looking forward to hearing his opinion in terms of what do we do to try and get more people younger involved in hunting without it being,
Yeah.
too expensive. Because in 10 years' time, or 20 years' time, this is the profession that he's chosen to take over the rest of his career. That bracket, the 40 to 50-year-olds are now 60 to 70-year-olds. So that takes them
Yeah.
out the equation. It's going to affect him somewhere down the line. So I'm interested to hear what
True.
he's got to say about it as well.
I mean, the entry barriers of hunting have gone up a lot. Even,
Heavily.
we speak about the prices of butchery and everything. You look at the prices of ammunition over the last 10 years, and you're going from, I'll use 308. My father shoots a 308. Box of PMPs used to be, $250. And now you look at places like all the big gun shops, Safari Outdoor and that. And I mean, even Safari Outdoor has decent prices, and you're looking at 600, 700, 800 a box of ammo. And it's a box of 20. It's a
Yeah.
lot. It's a lot of money. Even reloading components are getting expensive now. You can't find a box of heads for under 1.2. The entry barriers are climbing and climbing, and it's putting people off.
No, you're spot on. I mean, we we were digging through a friend of mine's safe the other day, and his father left him a whole bunch of ammunition when he passed, and he pulled out also a box of PMPs. But I think that these things were from like 1980 or 1990 or something like that. They were very
Yo,
old, and he never wants to shoot them. It's like a family heirloom. It reminds of his dad, and he wants to keep the box. But on the box was 20 rand for a box of 20. They were 1 rand per bullet.
no man.
Yeah. And now we went in to go and buy some ammo the other day. We bought some Hornadies, also 308, 150 grand, kind of box standard, nothing special. These are not, precision shooting rounds for competition. These are just soft points for general hunting. 899 rand for a box of 20. I couldn't believe it.
My man, that's ridiculous. Okay, but
Yeah.
when we look at a box of ammo for $20, my old man was telling me the other day, in those days, that's sort of when he matriculated school. You could buy, I think at the school tuck shop, you could buy a thing of chips, and you could get a little bit of like chicken or some, I don't know, some biltong and a cool drink for 50 cents. I used to get 12 waffles for 80 cents back in the day. So the economy has changed, but the fact of the matter is still that ammo is getting bloody expensive. Yo, we can't miss as much as we used to. Flip it.
Yeah, no, you're damn right. If you start target shooting, it becomes very expensive. You get to the
No!
you get to the field, you set up a box, and you take 2 shots, and that's it. Just to make
Oh, that's
sure that you're
$100
you're
just like
okay.
that.
No, absolutely. So, yeah, it is a problem. It is a problem, and it's something that we need to address somehow, and I don't know how we do it. I understand that the guys who run these outfits have got to make a living, and a lot of their reliance, especially, is on overseas hunters coming over, and as well as I
Yeah,
do. You look at a price list that's for local, let's call them biltong hunters, and then you look at a price list for overseas customer who's coming over, and you're looking at, let's say, 1,500 or 1,800 rand for an impala. They're paying $450 for an impala, and you think to yourself,
there we go.
that's expensive. That's 9,000
Yeah,
rand or 8,000 rand. That's a lot of money for an impala. But I understand that the guys need to make a living. But what I would like to implore to farm owners and landowners who use to hunt is have a look at your local market, and in order to build, it's almost like you don't want to flood the market, but by the same token, you need to get people in, and the only way you're going to do that is
true.
by not making it, not taking it at a price bracket that's so far out of reach for the guy on
Yeah.
the guy on the street.
I mean, it's, there's a small minority of people that every landowner, family, friends, and your nieces and nephews who can come hunt for free. Like, I've been up to my mate's farm. I went up to Gareth Davies' farm, as you guys would know, in the Winterberg. And I didn't pay a cent. Okay, I paid for fuel. I contributed to food, maybe a little bit of, a little bit of contribution towards drinks, and that at the end of the day, pretty much just costed me fuel. I used their rifle, their ammunition, hunted on their farm. And the nice thing about the thing is, what we have that people in the city don't have that allows us to hunt is we have access to land. Whereas we go back in earlier in the podcast, we spoke about this. Entry barriers for people all around the world is limited access to land. So if I have land, that means that I can go hunt on someone else's land, and in return, they come to my place. Whereas now, if I live in a city, I've either got to pay to go hunt, which, as we've been saying, it costs a hell of a lot, or I've got to somehow know somebody that has land. If you're in the States, there's a YouTube channel, a group of guys who do a really good job, Seek One Productions, I think it is. And they all guys who live in the suburbs of the city, and there's these green zones within the city or the suburbs, the outskirts, and they go hunt, in the suburbs. There's, a hectare or whatever of forest in amongst the city, and they go hunt there. So residents of America have access to public land, which good for them. They've got access. There isn't much of an excuse apart from having to travel from the city. You can buy a bow. I don't think you need a license. Correct me if I'm wrong, for a bow in the States. You can buy a bow, go hunt public land, you can get the experience. Whereas here in South Africa, if you live in a city and you know nobody with land, you end up paying. And I think that puts a lot of people off.
Spot on. Absolutely spot on. And it's a bit of a pro quo, and I'll go back to the UK. I'll go back to the UK because in the UK it's hunting in the UK, for instance, has always been seen as like a very upper class sport, if you will. It's always been
for the royalty, yeah.
It was exactly right, spot on. It was very much for a higher wealth bracket, and the problem is that wealth bracket or that tradition has started to diminish in the UK as well. So it's it's an inherent problem across the world that hunting is definitely taking a knock, and it's a multitude of different reasons. But that's why when we go back to what we first started talking about at the beginning of the show, we have a responsibility as hunters, landowners, and people who have been brought up in this kind of social culture of we go out there, we get in touch with nature, we bring food home, we put it on a plate, we eat it. We have an inherent responsibility to be able to continue that, and not just continue it, grow it. And the only way we're going to do that is by, I'm not bashing hunters, but we gotta change something between us,
Yeah.
So we've got a responsibility, and yeah, it's a lot, it's a lot of things that need to change, but it's worrying that such a small percentage of existing hunters out there, like I said, 10% are only 18 to 30-year-olds, when that really should be the biggest majority.
Yeah. I think the two main takeaways, if we can take away anything from this, is that hunting needs to become more accessible for people, whether that's financially or physically, getting out to a property. If we can make it accessible for people, I think there's more of an attraction. There's less barrier for them to enter the community and the tradition of hunting. And I also think that we need to educate people. I think we need people to see through the social media propaganda and actually push the real truth behind why we do what we do.
Absolutely. And, I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts. So please feel free to comment in the comment section. And, we love hearing, difference of opinions. It's something, this is a conversation that needs to be had with everybody. So, please feel free to comment. And that concludes the end of the show. So don't forget to like and subscribe on the YouTube channel, and we'll see you at the next show.
I'll see you guys next time.